For more than 50 years, Paul Newman was married to Joanne Woodward, a love story almost unheard of in Hollywood. On being faithful to his wife, Newman famously remarked, "I have steak at home, why go out for hamburgers?"
The world once worshipped Joanne Woodward and Paul Newman as Hollywood's ultimate dream couple, the picture of perfect love. But behind all that glitter and glam, their marriage was far from flawless. Now, at 94, Joanne has dropped a shocking bombshell. The so-called perfect romance was actually filled with heartbreak, from Paul's secret same-sex encounters and relentless drinking habits to moments where he reportedly pressured Joanne into wild, uncomfortable bedroom situations. And that's not even the worst of it. Many say Newman's struggles as a father played a dark role in his son's battle with addiction and untimely death. So what exactly did Joanne reveal after enduring over 50 years of love, loss, and silence? Stay tuned, because secret number 10 will flip your image of Paul Newman upside down. Joanne Woodward wasn't just any actress. She was a powerhouse. Known for playing emotionally complex women, she cemented her legacy when she won the 1957 Academy Award for The Three Faces of Eve. But acting wasn't what made people adore her most. It was her lifelong love story with the man everyone thought was Hollywood's perfect gentleman, Paul Newman. For decades, they were seen as the golden couple who had it all: fame, respect, and undying devotion. Yet the truth behind closed doors was far messier than anyone imagined. By 2007, Joanne was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and many feared she'd slowly forget the man who once stood by her through every storm. But shockingly, in recent years, she's reacted strongly whenever Paul's name comes up, sparking curiosity about what really happened between them. She started to reveal haunting secrets behind their fairy tale marriage, and what she shared has left everyone stunned. Because the truth? Their love story didn't begin as a Hollywood fantasy. It began as an affair. Love is often praised as eternal, but in Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward's story, it hid under layers of secrets and guilt. In his own memoir, The Extraordinary Life of an Ordinary Man, Paul spilled truths that left fans speechless. Their marriage, the one people thought was destiny, actually started with betrayal. Back in 1952, when Paul met Joanne for the first time, he was already a married man. At that time, Newman was tied to his first wife, Jackie Witt, and they had 3 children together. But Joanne's charm hit him like lightning. He was pulled into an emotional storm he couldn't resist, a secret affair that grew more intense with every meeting. By 1958, Paul divorced Jackie and made Joanne his new bride, officially sealing their place as Hollywood's ultimate power couple. Yet behind that glamorous love story, Paul carried a heavy shadow: guilt. No matter how much success or love he found, he could never shake off the pain of leaving his first family behind. That guilt haunted him for life. And then came the darker side of his fame. Every time Paul drank, he turned into a completely different man, a loud, raging version of himself. In The Extraordinary Life of an Ordinary Man, he confessed it all. He wasn't just someone who enjoyed a drink. He was deep in the grip of alcoholism. His wild nights weren't just parties, they were chaos. There were shouts, fists slamming against walls, and terrified silence from his children who didn't know what to do. The last movie stars revealed that alcohol became the invisible villain in their marriage. Joanne once said her husband's drinking was the pain that gnawed away at our lives. Newman admitted that he often drank to numb the emptiness from his early years. Some mornings he'd wake up blank, unable to remember anything he'd said or done, forced to face the fear and heartbreak written across his wife's and children's faces. At one point, Paul and Joanne's marriage nearly crashed to the ground. Everything they had built together was hanging by a thread. Luckily, Paul eventually snapped out of it. He realized how far he had fallen and made the painful choice to quit drinking for good. But even after sobering up, the scars from those years didn't disappear overnight. Joanne made sure he truly felt the pain he had caused. For 6 long months, she gave him the coldest punishment imaginable. Paul had to beg forgiveness, literally on his knees. While he was lost in his drunken spiral, Joanne reached her breaking point. She packed up the kids, flew to Switzerland, and left Paul completely alone in their empty mansion. The silence was brutal. Paul was drained, desperate, and full of regret. Some nights he even stood outside her hotel, pounding on the door, pleading for her to open up and talk to him. But Joanne said nothing. He collapsed outside that door, kneeling in the freezing night, praying she would give him one more chance. It was the darkest stretch of their entire marriage, and the moment that forced him to face his demons head on. Joanne wasn't just punishing him to be cruel. She wanted him to finally understand that love and alcohol could never exist side by side. But here's the real twist. Joanne didn't stay because she was weak or forgiving to a fault. She stayed because she believed in the man Paul once was, the kind, romantic, passionate partner she had fallen for years earlier. That tiny spark of faith kept her fighting when most would have walked away. And when the storm finally cleared, their passion reignited like wildfire. Fierce, unstoppable, and sometimes so intense, it crossed every conventional line. Their chemistry was the stuff of Hollywood legend, wild, passionate, and completely unfiltered.
Said, "Would you like to work on this project with me?" And I said, "Certainly." Little did I know. It's been some almost 6 years now.
Paul and Joanne were known for their fiery connection, and at one point they were so caught up in each other that they reportedly made love several times a day. Their bond went far beyond ordinary romance. It was intense, risky, and charged with energy that never seemed to fade. But Paul wasn't just passionate. He was creative and controlling when it came to intimacy. Joanne once hinted that her husband loved turning their private life into a performance, a mix of emotion, fantasy, and power. He'd lock the door, switch off the lights, and suddenly their bedroom became a stage where every moment felt like a dramatic scene straight out of a movie. Joanne shared that Paul had a fascination with role play, taking on strong, authoritative characters while she played along, swept up in the moment. According to her, Paul's imagination was wild. Sometimes he would take on roles like an officer, a judge, or someone with commanding energy, while Joanne became part of his world of make-believe. She admitted that these daring games, though intense, kept the spark alive in their marriage. It was their own way of staying connected through creativity and passion, even when life around them was falling apart. But their adventures didn't stop there. Hidden deep inside their luxurious mansion was something few people ever knew existed, a secret space Paul himself designed. He called it his private sanctuary, but Joanne jokingly nicknamed it the Temple of Pleasure. It was a secret room filled with thick red velvet curtains that shut out the light, a massive bed covered in black silk, and walls built to keep the outside world from hearing a thing. That room became their private escape, a place where they could shut out Hollywood, let go of their worries, and reignite the spark that defined their relationship for decades. Close friends of the Newman family revealed that the secret room, the one they called the F Hut, wasn't just some private fantasy spot. It was actually a crucial part of Paul and Joanne's marriage. That hidden space became their emotional outlet, a place where anger, jealousy, and frustration transformed into passion and connection. Joanne even once confessed, "Without that room, our marriage would have fallen apart long ago." But not everyone in the house understood what went on behind those velvet curtains. The secrecy around the room sometimes caused confusion, especially for their kids. One night, a child accidentally knocked on the door, and Paul, caught off guard, quickly turned up the jazz music to drown out the sounds and sent them away. It was awkward and strange, and stories like that only made people believe the Newmans' private life was far more intense than the media ever guessed. Even with all the red velvet and locked doors, there were still darker shadows that haunted Paul, ghosts from long before Hollywood fame ever found him. Paul Newman carried emotional scars from his childhood, shaped by a father who was strict, distant, and sometimes cruel. His father, Arthur Sigmund Newman Sr., owned a sporting goods store and seemed respectable from the outside, but behind closed doors he was harsh and volatile. He drank heavily, and when he was drunk, his temper flared out of control. Paul could never forget the image of his father slamming a glass onto the table and shouting. Those sounds burned into his memory. In his father's cold eyes, Paul was never good enough. He once said that his father's words, "You'll never be anybody," haunted him for life. That painful rejection planted a deep sense of doubt inside him. So no matter how much fame, money, or love he earned, Paul Newman always carried the feeling that he wasn't enough. Paul Newman once described his father as a dark shadow that never left his side. A man whose silence spoke louder than words. That quiet, cold presence made Paul feel small, invisible, and constantly on edge. Even as he rose to fame and became one of Hollywood's biggest stars, that fear still followed him everywhere. He often dreamt of his father, harsh, judging, and unrelenting, a ghost that haunted his mind no matter how much success he achieved. The cruel twist. Paul had sworn he'd never become like his father, but fate had other plans. Without realizing it, he ended up repeating the same painful cycle, and that pattern led to the greatest heartbreak of his life, the loss of his eldest son, Scott. Paul's relationship with Scott was rocky from the start. Growing up as the child of a Hollywood legend came with heavy pressure, and Scott always felt like he was living in his father's shadow. What began as admiration quickly turned into rebellion. As he got older, Scott started acting out, drinking, experimenting with drugs, and chasing danger just to feel free from the weight of expectations. Paul, who was still battling his own issues with alcohol, became terrified watching his son spiral into the same darkness he once knew so well. But instead of showing empathy, their emotions clashed. Joanne once recalled a tense moment when Paul, furious and scared, slapped Scott and dragged him out of school after hearing he'd been skipping classes and running with the wrong crowd. Scott wanted his father's approval, but Paul's emotional distance only pushed him further away. On film sets, Newman was a star, but at home, he was strict, distant, and often unavailable. Friends of Scott remembered him saying, "He's not my father," more than once.
Almost entirely, with due respect to the men who are involved, almost entirely by women.
A heartbreaking reflection of how fractured their bond had become. Then came tragedy in 1978. Scott Newman died at just 28 years old from a drug overdose. For Paul, it was the moment his world shattered, the cruel proof that even a Hollywood icon couldn't escape the pain of his past. Paul Newman was completely shattered by his son's death. The grief tore him apart. When he saw Scott's lifeless body, he broke down, consumed by unbearable guilt. He couldn't stop blaming himself, convinced that if he had been more present, more patient, and more understanding, maybe his son wouldn't have fallen so deep into self-destruction. In the years that followed, Paul opened up in interviews with raw honesty, admitting he feared he'd never truly connected with his children. He confessed that he wasn't ready for fatherhood, that he didn't know how to love and sacrifice the way a parent should. "I only became a father because I got married," he once said with heartbreaking regret. Losing Scott was the deepest wound of his life, but even that tragedy wasn't the last secret hiding behind Paul Newman's polished Hollywood image. The world knew Paul as the perfect gentleman, handsome, faithful, and completely devoted to Joanne. But behind closed doors, whispers told another story. According to people close to the family, Paul once became involved in a secret same-sex relationship, a hidden chapter of his life that few dared to speak about. Sources claimed the other man was a major star himself, someone Paul had met on a movie set. What began as friendship slowly turned into an intense, private romance that Paul struggled to control. The affair stayed hidden until Joanne allegedly received anonymous letters exposing everything, complete with dates, times, and even meeting places. Furious and heartbroken, she reportedly threw the entire pile of letters right into Paul's face. Their argument that night was explosive. Neighbors later said they heard glass shatter, Joanne sobbing uncontrollably, and Paul shouting in despair. After that storm, Joanne lived with constant fear, terrified that one day Paul might just disappear without saying a word. Paul Newman found himself trapped between two worlds, the flawless Hollywood gentleman everyone adored and the hidden self he could never fully reveal. The secret affairs were just the surface of something much deeper, a wound that had been quietly burning inside him his entire life. Behind the charm, blue eyes, and effortless confidence, Newman was haunted by insecurity. He often described himself as a lousy man and struggled to believe he truly deserved his fame, love, or success. At glamorous parties, surrounded by applause and admiration, he'd still find himself sipping a drink and whispering under his breath, "I'm not good enough." That feeling had been carved into him since childhood. Growing up in a home filled with alcohol, tension, and emotional neglect, it left him convinced he didn't deserve love or peace. That fear of failure consumed him. Paul turned down countless movie roles, not because he didn't want them, but because he thought he wasn't capable enough to live up to them. Even after delivering legendary performances, he would walk off set and punish himself. Certain people were only praising him out of politeness. More than once, he returned to his dressing room, looked into the mirror, and overcome by frustration, smashed it to pieces, hating the reflection staring back at him. No matter how famous he became, Newman couldn't shake the habit of comparing himself to other icons like Marlon Brando or James Dean. He saw them as real artists and himself as just a handsome face standing in their shadow. Even when the world celebrated him as one of the greatest actors of the 20th century, he couldn't accept it. In his private journals, he once wrote that he felt like a lucky scarecrow, someone who didn't belong, terrified that one day everyone would finally see through the illusion. Ironically, the woman who shared her entire life with Paul Newman didn't even like him at first. Their epic love story didn't start like a Hollywood romance. It began with tension and rolled eyes. Back in 1953, when they first met backstage on Broadway, Paul was a struggling young actor in his early 20s, worn out from endless auditions and barely holding on to his dreams. He looked more like a nervous college kid than a future movie legend. Joanne, confident and sharp, took one look at him and thought he was too perfect, so polished he was actually boring. Meanwhile, Paul wasn't exactly charmed either. He thought Joanne was too bold, too fiery, and not the kind of woman who'd ever fit into his life. Their first conversations were awkward and full of friction, two strong personalities clashing in a cramped dressing room. They walked away annoyed, convinced they'd never cross paths again. But fate clearly had other plans. Just a few years later, they ended up cast together in a film. And that's when everything changed. The sparks they tried to ignore before turned into a wildfire of emotion, chemistry, and undeniable passion. That single project didn't just shift their careers. It rewrote their entire lives. Their love went through decades of joy, betrayal, forgiveness, and fame. And then came one of life's cruelest tests. After years of standing beside Paul through every storm, Joanne faced her own battle, Alzheimer's disease. When Paul passed away, her world crumbled. The glamorous, quick-witted woman the world admired began to slowly fade, losing her memories piece by piece. Today, there are days when Joanne sits quietly by the window, staring out for hours. She forgets names, faces, even the dates on the calendar. But through it all, one image has never left her, the memory of Paul Newman, the man who held her hand for more than 50 years. Even as time steals everything else, his presence still flickers in her heart like a light that refuses to go out. Sometimes Joanne sits quietly, her voice barely above a whisper as she says, "Paul, where are you?" It's heartbreaking, yet also beautiful proof that their love was so powerful, even illness couldn't erase it. Despite the pain of her fading memory, the bond between Paul and Joanne still lives on through their family, who have turned their grief into purpose. Through the Newman's own foundation, they've dedicated themselves to raising money and awareness for Alzheimer's, keeping not just their love, but their legacy, alive and burning bright. Before fate separated them, Paul made sure Joanne carried a treasure chest of memories, filled with tenderness, laughter, and moments of real devotion. When he wasn't battling his demons, Paul Newman was a man overflowing with affection. He never hid how much he adored his wife. Whenever he passed Joanne, he'd gently touch her shoulder, brush her arm, or sneak up to wrap her in a warm embrace. At family dinners, he'd quietly refill her glass, rest his hand on hers, and give her a look that spoke louder than any words. A mix of desire, comfort, and deep respect. Even during tense times, Paul always found little ways to remind Joanne she was still the center of his universe. Their kids once recalled, "We saw them have a huge fight once, But a few hours later, Dad was sitting beside Mom, holding her hand like nothing else in the world mattered. Their marriage wasn't flawless. They argued, they drifted, and they endured moments of silence. But love was the thread that always pulled them back together. To their children, it wasn't a Hollywood romance full of glamour and cameras. It was something far more human. Two imperfect people choosing over and over again to hold on to each other through every storm and every season of life. When people picture Hollywood, they usually think of whirlwind romances, broken vows, and scandals that burn out faster than they start. But in that glittering chaos, Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward's marriage stood out like a miracle, lasting over 50 years. Their story was the dream the public wanted to believe in, yet underneath, it also reflected the quiet heartbreaks no one ever saw. For decades, Paul and Joanne were celebrated as Hollywood's golden couple. The media couldn't get enough of them, two dazzling stars who seemed to have beaten the curse of fame.
Actually, no. We met in our mutual agent's office.
Paul, with his magnetic blue eyes and calm confidence, became every woman's fantasy of the perfect gentleman. Joanne, an Oscar-winning actress, was admired not just for her beauty, but for her brain's grace and strength. Together, they looked like the ultimate American dream, proof that love could survive even in the most seductive, chaotic industry on earth. Their romance gave people hope. In a world filled with cheating headlines and failed marriages, they became the comforting illusion that true love could still exist under the spotlight. And Paul Newman himself added to the legend with one unforgettable quote that made fans swoon. When asked about temptation, he famously said, "Why go out for a hamburger when you have steak at home?" To millions, it became a symbol of loyalty. The promise of a man who, despite fame and desire surrounding him, stayed devoted to his wife. For women everywhere, Joanne Woodward became living proof that intelligence and strength could hold a man's heart, even in a town built on temptation. Family magazines, talk shows, and interviews turned their love story into a fairy tale that millions adored. Yet the irony was hard to miss. The more perfect their image became, the more people began to wonder if any love that flawless could truly be real. How could a star like Paul Newman, one of the most irresistible men of his generation, have stayed so loyal, so perfect, without ever slipping? For years, fans believed the legend. But as time passed, rumors began to swirl, whispers of Paul's late-night drinking binges and of Joanne quietly enduring the chaos of his alcohol-fueled rages. When the extraordinary life of an ordinary man hit shelves, the public was stunned. The mask finally cracked. In his own words, Paul Newman admitted the truth. He had battled alcoholism, lost control more than once, and terrified his wife and children with his outbursts. He even confessed to something that shook fans to the core, deep regret over leaving his first wife, Jackie Witt, for Joanne. That confession shattered the myth of flawless love, revealing instead a marriage filled with both devotion and damage. But maybe that's what made their story so unforgettable. Their love wasn't perfect, it was human. It showed that even the brightest stars can fall, yet still find the strength to rise again. The Newmans' marriage wasn't a fairy tale. It was a battlefield of emotions. Passion, pain, forgiveness, and endurance all tangled together. Joanne herself once considered walking away. There were months when the two barely spoke, when silence filled their house like fog. But somehow she always chose to stay, and that decision, that quiet act of faith, spoke louder than any Hollywood script ever could. Their story hit home because it wasn't just about fame or beauty. It was about two people who refused to give up on each other. Paul and Joanne's marriage became a paradox, a dream wrapped in heartbreak, a union where love and flaws existed side by side. They proved that true love isn't effortless. It's about patience, forgiveness, and learning to live with each other's shadows. That balance of light and darkness is exactly what made their bond legendary, a timeless Hollywood lesson about what it really takes to make love last. There are silences in Hollywood that everyone feels, but no one dares to touch. They're not born from imagination, but from shadows buried beneath decades of fame and heartbreak. Behind the blinding lights, the roaring applause, and those flawless faces frozen on the big screen, there lies a world no one was meant to see. A world of chaos, secrets, and quiet pain. The stage lights might shine bright, but they also hide everything the public was never supposed to know. Beneath the glamour lives a maze of deception, regret, and hidden truths, too heavy for the spotlight. Every legend, even the ones we adore, isn't just built on talent and beauty, but on tears, scars, and the silent struggles fought far away from the cameras. Those secrets didn't disappear. They just got buried under time, waiting for someone brave enough to uncover them. Sometimes it takes only one forgotten detail, a confession, a letter, a single slip, to make the perfect mask crack. And when that mask finally trembles, a chilling question hits us all. Was everything we ever admired just a performance? Were the smiles, the love stories, and the fame just illusions hiding the raw, untold truth lurking beneath? Because in Hollywood's history, behind every spotlight, there's always a shadow waiting to speak. If you want more untold stories, shocking revelations, and hidden Hollywood truths, don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and drop a comment below.